Welcome back, everybody. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. I am your host,
Steve Eisenhower, and I am joined with my good friend Steven Martinez. And today we are going to talk about how a 19th century bishop and one of the most highly regarded Christian commentators, even still today, quite frankly, debunks the origins of the church. So let's hop right into it. But before we get started, everyone, check out the description of this video, all the literary resources you may need. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and give Mr. Martinez and I a big thumbs up. Coming through?
Yes, sir.
All righty. So, Bishop debunks the church. Let's do this. Can you still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. It was showing something funky with my mic. But all right, here's the verse of scripture in question.
You wouldn't mind if you want me to read it?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Acts 13:1. Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon that were called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul.
Okay, so pretty standard. I'm sure most people are at least familiar with this passage, and everyone knows that Antioch is where Christians were first called Christians, right? It was very much Saul or Paul's home base. Well, let's see what Mr. Ellicott has to say about this. So I'll read this one for you. So Manaen, according to Ellicott's commentary on Acts 13:1, Ellicott says, Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, this literally means he was the foster brother of Herod. So here we enter on a name that has historical associations of some interest. In the early youth of Herod the Great, that's the father of Herod the Tetrarch, his future greatness had been foretold by an Essene prophet of the name Menachem, or Manaen in Greek. And this is cited in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, Book 15, Chapter 10, Paragraph 5. When the prediction was fulfilled, he sought to show honor to the prophet. The identity of name makes it probable that the man who now meets us was the son or grandson of this said Essene, and that Herod had him brought up with Antipas, which is Herod the Tetrarch, as a mark of his favor. Both Antipas and Archelaus were educated at Rome, and Manaen may have therefore accompanied them thither. By what steps he was led to believe in Jesus, we can only conjecture, but it seems probable that the austere type of life so closely resembling that of the Essenes, which was presented by John the Baptist, may have impressed him, as he was living in the court of his early companion, and that through him he may have been led on to the higher truth, and in due time after the day of Pentecost have become a sharer in the prophetic gift. The fact that Herod the Great had adorned the city of Antioch with long and stately colonnade may perhaps have given him a certain degree of influence there. So that's a lot to unpack, and we have subsequent slides to unpack it, but just at first glance, do you have anything to add at this?
Well, it makes sense that it would be coming from the Essenes.
Mm-hmm.
They were most definitely one of the most. They were very much into the apocalyptic motifs that were going around at that day and age. They were really into it.
Yeah.
And you see that with First Enoch, and
Right.
and the subsequent versions of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense. That's probably why they would eventually come to see Jesus as their Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because they're coming from that background.
Yeah, that Enochian dualistic cosmology. Yeah, we see a lot of Enoch at Qumran, actually. So it's pretty clear that it's something they held in rather high regard.
Yeah.
Even if it was a library, you don't just stash things you don't care about, especially in wartime, right?
Yep.
And after the discovery of Qumran and seeing the War Scroll and so on, this John the Baptist idea, it maps on perfect. A voice calling out in the wilderness. The War Scroll labels the Essenes as the exiles in the wilderness, the sons of light who will come against the sons of darkness. So very, very much mirrored language. They were both very ascetic, right? They lived an ascetic lifestyle, and we'll get into all that. But it's just very clear that Ellicott's commentary was written in the mid 1800s. So already 200 years ago, we had scholars admitting outright that the Essenes, John the Baptist, and the Herodians, have a much bigger part to play in all this than modern Christianity wants us to think. Right? So we're already starting to see some tie-ins that most people who don't know any history don't really even think about. And that's a cause for alarm, people. You learn a little bit of history, and this stuff starts to seem a little shaky. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, that's where it starts, and a lot of people don't think about it. They read that there's a Herodian connection with all the characters of these biblical stories, and they don't make the connection, and it's more likely because they're taught not to make such a connection.
Yeah.
They're never drawn to this. Nothing's ever really brought up about it, so they assume it's of little significance, little regard, and they just skip over it. They go, oh, he had some Herodian blood in him. Cool. Well, what does Jesus say next? Oh, that's all they care
Right.
about.
Yep. Well, all right. Next, we're actually going to look at the prophecy that's mentioned in Josephus. So let's check that out. Do you want me to read this one, or you want to read this one?
You can get this one. It's a little long, and I'm a little blind.
Okay, so the Josephus quote. Now there was one of the Essenes whose name was Menachem, which would be Menaean in Greek, who had this testimony that he not only conducted his life after an excellent manner, but had the foreknowledge of future events given him by God also. So what we're seeing already is that the Essenes in Josephus's worldview are being elevated a little bit, being shown that they're rather pious, right?
Yep.
This man once saw Herod when he was a child and going to school, and saluted him as King of the Jews. Sounds familiar. But he, thinking that either he did not know him, or that he was in jest, put him in mind that he would be a private man. But Menachem smiled to himself, and clapped him on his backside with his hand, and said, However that be, thou wilt be king, and wilt begin thy reign happily, for God finds thee worthy of it. And do thou remember the blows that Menachem hath given thee, as being a signal of the change of thy fortune. And truly this will be the best reasoning for thee, that thou love justice towards men, and piety towards God, and clemency towards thy citizens. Yet do I know that the whole conduct will be, that thou wilt not be such an one, for thou wilt excel all men in happiness, and obtain an everlasting reputation, but will forget piety and righteousness. And those crimes will not be concealed from God at the conclusion of your life, when you will find that he will be mindful of them and punish you for them. Now at that time Herod did not at all attend to what Menachem said, as having no hopes of such advancement. But a little afterward, when he was so fortunate as to be advanced to the dignity of king, and was in the height of his dominion, he sent for Menachem, and asked him how long he should reign. Menachem did not tell him the full length of his reign. Wherefore, upon the silence of his, he asked him farther, whether he should reign 10 years or not. He replied, yes, 20 years, nay, 30 years, but did not assign the just determinate limit of his reign. Herod was satisfied with these replies, and gave Menachem his hand, and dismissed him. And from that time he continued to honor all of the Essenes. We have thought it proper to relate these facts to our teachers, how strange soever they be, and to declare that what hath happened among us, because many of the Essenes have, by their excellent virtue, been thought worthy of this knowledge of divine revelations. Clearly the Essenes are being very magnified here.
They're being given a lot of privilege here.
Yep. As is the Herodians, you know.
Yeah, very privileged group.
If the War Scroll if we're to take the war scroll as legitimate of the way the Essenes viewed the impending doom, basically, we understand that Kittim, the Kittites in the war scroll, have to do with Rome. So the Herodians were client kings of the Romans. So what's that telling us here? Were the Essenes just kissing up?
It seems like they had their inside man. They had the whole inside track going at this point.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so it's very alarming.
Yeah,
right?
it really does paint the picture for you. Like when you imagine what's going on in the first century, at the turn of the century, when Jesus is supposed to be wandering about, you wonder, what's going on, because especially when you look at New Testament scripture, you're only given certain snippets, and mostly, especially when they pertain to Herod, they're mostly just to make him out to be this violent, bloodthirsty king, which by all standards of history, I'm pretty sure any historian will tell you, he definitely was.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But there's always so much more that goes on in the background that you don't hear, because there's always a reason for him to act that way. He always has, and I wouldn't say it's a just reason, but it is always something that provokes him.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's always something going on in the background, so that makes you wonder what else is going on. So I really appreciate books and scholars, especially like James Valiant, who go into a lot of the politics that are going on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very much along those lines. What's going on politically, the culture, the climate, surrounding these groups and their relationships to each other, and the interactions they share.
Right. And it really paints it as though the Essenes would have had a basically scot-free card with the Herodians.
Yeah, they were running around. They had all the privilege.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So Herod Antipas, as we read in the commentary, this Manaen, the grandson of Menachem, that Essene, was really literally the foster brother to Herod Antipas, taken into the home of Herod the Great. So he had an Essene living with him in the palace. That's about as privileged as it gets.
Yeah.
Right?
Which kind of makes me just kind of reflect on something Paul said. He says he has people in the house of Herod. That makes you almost wonder, well, Paul, if the Essenes have people in the house of Herod, is that your connection then?
Right, especially when they're both being listed as teachers in the Antioch church. Manaen, who was the grandson of an Essene and the foster son of the Herodian dynasty, is listed in the same breath as Saul as a teacher in the original Christian church, right? That's where Christians were given the name Christians, was at Antioch.
Yep.
Yeah, so if you want to give us this little bio on Herod Antipas, we can get into it a little bit.
I actually don't have much of a bio on Herod Antipas, but...
No, just the slide I have up.
Oh. Herod Antipas, he was born around 21 BCE, died after 39 CE, so that's about roughly 4 or 5 years after Jesus would have walked and died. He was ruler of a minor principality in the Roman Empire in Galilee, in northern Palestine and Perea, east of the Jordan River and Dead Sea, and ruled throughout Jesus of Nazareth's ministry. So yeah, he was specifically over Galilee.
Yep. Sepphoris and Tiberias were his two throned cities. And they're both very Greek. If anyone has watched the show on Jesus' Greek hometown, check it out. It was like Herod Antipas's crown jewel, Sepphoris and Tiberias, both of which are mentioned in the New Testament. I don't know if Sepphoris is by name, but there are allusions to it.
Yeah, and then is Tiberias mentioned by name? I think it is.
Tiberias is, yeah. The Sea of Galilee is actually called the Sea of Tiberias in the New Testament. But something striking is Antipas was over the Dead Sea, the area of the Dead Sea. And where do we find
that's
the
right
Essene? That's where Qumran is. That's where we find the Essene library. So does that mean Antipas was kind of turning a blind eye to them too?
Very possible.
I mean, he would have been gone long before the revolt. But still, if we understand that the the Dead Sea area is where the Essenes had their commune, their communal living areas. That's right here in Antipas's domain.
And that would make sense. During the reign of Herod Antipas, they have much more protection. They have a guy on the inside. And when
Yeah.
the Herod, of course, the family is
His
dethroned, now
stepbrother.
they're scattering.
Yeah, his stepbrother, right? His
Yeah.
stepbrother is an Essene, so of course he would look
Favorably on them.
favorably upon them. Yeah, right. This is Herod Antipas's brother, Archelaus.
Herod Archelaus, he was born 22 BC. Judica died somewhere around 18 CE in Gaul. He was the son of the principal heir of Herod the First, of Herod the Great, as king of Judea, and deposed by Rome because of his unpopularity with the Jews.
That would make sense as to why he's not mentioned in that verse in Acts.
Yeah.
Right? Because he wasn't looked upon favorably, whereas Antipas might have been if he was looking favorably upon the Essenes in his region, you know?
Yeah.
But the commentary also mentioned that all three of them were, for sure, Archelaus and Antipas got their education in Rome, but that Manaen might have also. Right? So where's the worldview? Where's the worldview at, people?
Roman.
Right? Where's the worldview, people? Look at that coin. that's the print of what a coin in his time would have looked like. That's Rome, man. Get it? Rome, man. But I mean, if he's living in the house of an Edomite client king, you know, just where's the worldview at? And people wonder why Christianity and Rome itself are labeled as Edom. Well, let's look at these client kings and these people who were, you know, pivotal in the origins of Christianity were Edomites. The Jewish Masorah, the tradition, even states that the first converts to Christianity were Edomites. I mean, that's seeming like it's lining up pretty close. If Manaen, you know, the Herods, Agrippa, all them are all interconnected in this, right? So it's really starting to all come together, people, is how much influence Rome and Paul may have been an Edomite. He was related to the Herodians.
Yeah.
You know, so if he shared a bloodline with the Herodian Edomites, what's that telling you? That's severing away from Judaism and getting deep into Rome.
Yeah.
You know, is there anything else you'd have to say on that?
Even if Paul was Jewish, even if they do have some Jewish blood in their lineage, they're not going to be thinking Jewish. They're not coming from that background. They're not coming from that worldview.
Right. I read an article recently because Paul in Romans greets a kinsman named Herodian. I was reading an article on that, and it mentioned that if in fact Paul did have Herodian kinship, that would have guaranteed him Roman citizenship. Yeah. So there's no more thinking about, oh, well, his dad was from Tarsus and all this. If he does in fact have Herodian blood in him, that's a guarantee of Roman citizenship. And we see in Acts and his own letters that he professes to be a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we see
in the trial of a Roman citizen.
Exactly. Brought before Nero.
Yeah.
And further, when he goes into, and this is something I wanted to mention now that we have Archelaus up, when he is sent into Samaria, right, to hunt down Christians.
Yeah.
Could that be a made-up story? Sure. Certainly that it's from the behest of the high priest. Unless, of course, the high priest isn't the high priest we're thinking of, not a Sadducee high priest, but rather the Roman high priest who would have been located in Caesarea, because the way it worked back then, same thing would have been for Pontius Pilate. When you were I think that's called the praetor,
yeah,
the governor, the military governor, you were also the high priest of the Roman cult there. You had
That's true. This was at the height of the imperial cult.
So if he's a Roman citizen tied in with the Herodians, it just says at the behest of the high priest. Are we led to believe that it's the Jewish high priest? Sure. But could it be the high priest or the Pontifex Maximus stationed in Caesarea? Maybe. This is pre-temple destruction. So many directions this can go. And if he has the authority as a Herodian, Archelaus was actually over Samaria, Idumea, and Judea. So clearly he died before that point, but though they were all grouped into one region, Samaria, Judea, and Idumea. So borderlines wouldn't matter then if he has a praetor's blessing, if he's a Herodian, right? He could go anywhere in the region. So just the more you know, people, the more history you learn, it really starts to put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think with most Christians is that's really what they lack, is any sound knowledge of history of the region, political history, you know?
I mean, they have their church history. I mean, even when I was a Christian, church history was something that we were told to look at before we ever even bothered looking at secular history.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what Christians are going to face is they're going to face a competition against going to any secular history, or going towards just any non-Christian historian.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, Christian historians are going to point towards the history that the church wants you to believe, the history that the church has propagated for years, even though some of it has already been proven outright false.
Mm-hmm.
And the church acknowledges these falsehoods, but then they turn around and preach it anyway.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look at I just did a video recently on the Shroud of Turin, and people come up with some of the just wackiest evidence for it, you know. But one thing I thought was very, very striking was someone sent me evidence from a Catholic priest who's like an expert in the Shroud of Turin. So I don't know how you can be an expert when this thing's been around for 700 years, you know, and all of a sudden you have new evidence on it. But regardless, he's an expert, and his degree from whatever seminary or whatever he went to is in shroud studies. Shroud studies. Like he's a shroud of his degree is in the Shroud of Turin.
His degree is in looking at old antiquated pieces of cloth and telling you they clearly belong to Jesus. That's
Right.
about as professional as me going around telling people I'm a professional wizard. I am a professional wizard, but most people get a good laugh out of it more than like it's legit.
But what's funny is like that's not a degree, you know, that's selling snake oil. Do you know what I mean? Like if you walked into any job and said, "Oh, my degree is in the Shroud of Turin," they'd be like, "Where'd you get that at, Wish?" You know what I mean? Like turn around and get out of here, you know? So but yet we're expected to believe it because the Catholic Church says so. You know?
And I'm pretty sure the Catholic Church even says the Shroud of Turin isn't real. Didn't they have a bishop or someone in church history apparently like verified it wasn't real and historically said, yeah, it's not. It's a fraud.
The Pope, the original Pope, when it was presented, said, "Yeah, this thing ain't real."
There you go.
That's original. You know, that's when it first surfaced.
Yeah, the Pope himself, from the time period, from the day it was forged, outright says it's not real.
And even still today, it's still called an icon rather than a relic, because the Catholic Church refuses to confirm nor deny it, because, you know.
Because they started already bragging, "Oh, we got the real shroud, guys. We got Jesus' burial cloth. You won't believe it." And now they can't say that anymore because it's false. And they're like, "Well, We've already said it. We already blabbed our mouth. We can't go back on it now."
Mm-hmm. Never mind that the New Testament says he was wrapped in strips of cloth, not a shroud. But regardless, that's unimportant. We're getting off topic. All right. So John the Baptist, how does he tie into all this?
In the Antiquities of the Jews, Book 18, 116 through 119, Josephus confirmed that Herod Antipas slew John the Baptist after imprisoning him at Machaerus, because he feared John's influence might enable him to start a rebellion. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls drew attention to the numerous parallels between John's mission and that of the Essenes, with whom John may have received some of his religious training. Both were priestly in origin, were ascetic, and had intense and, in many respects, similar expectations about the end of the world.
Yep. They believed the end was imminent. They believed it was good versus evil. They were a voice in the dark, in the wilderness, right? They were both very entranced by this water baptism ritual. Yeah. So if we even see in the New Testament, this is actually something quite embarrassing for the New Testament, because according to this commentary, there was an Essene living with Antipas, like his stepbrother, right? So it's kind of embarrassing for the New Testament when we see that Antipas was actually grieved when he had to kill John the Baptist. We see that in the account when he had his head cut off for his little girlfriend.
He even asked her, "Are you sure you want this?"
Right.
That's my whole.
So what's that showing us? Is he it seems like he kind of had a soft spot for these people.
Yeah, but that soft spot would end eventually.
Right. And that's first century politics. When it comes to being an ethnarch or a tetrarch or a king or any type of royalty, especially a client king position as a vassal of a larger empire, it's kill or be killed, people. If you can't put down rebellion, well, next in line,
Even if they are your friends.
Right. And even if he didn't know John the Baptist, he had someone very similar in ideology standing right next to him.
Yeah, and if I've heard theories that John was the righteous teacher, the good teacher. And so if he was, then he just literally slew the main figurehead of their group. He most certainly would have faced quite a bit of backlash.
Right.
For this
Which is probably a reason for why the Essenes would have had to turn to Jesus. If Jesus was the main disciple of John, John gets his head cut off. Well, now your righteous teacher is gone, so now you have to turn to someone else. Right?
It kind of makes me think of my little theory that I texted you about the other day. So John is killed by Antipas. Jesus takes over. Paul, being a Herodian, wants to stop Jesus from continuing the wave of possible rebellion started by John. So Paul has Jesus killed by the high priest in order to take control of the movement, in order to steer it for their own benefit and possibly either to better their own elite group.
Right.
It's funny how all that just kind of runs together. Like, that'd be kind of
doesn't it kind of flow together so easily now?
Yeah.
Like, especially when we're seeing in Josephus that the Herodians and the Essenes were tight. Like, Antipas regrets having to kill him. Jesus comes on the scene as the number one disciple. Jesus even says about John, there was even look at the picture with the nimbus around John's head. There was no man or no one born of woman greater than John the Baptist. That means he sees John the Baptist above himself.
Yeah.
Right? That makes you the number one disciple.
Yeah.
So I don't know, people, what's it telling you?
There are a lot of ways this evidence can go. Just the only way it's not going to go is the way the Christians want it to go.
Right. And the Essenes, the war scroll, they were convinced that the final war, the apocalyptic war, was imminent. Jesus and Paul both teach imminence. They both teach that the kingdom is at hand, right? Powers of good versus the powers of darkness. The war scroll calls Belial, which is a Enochian version. Belial in Hebrew just means worthless. It's like an insult, basically telling you you're worthless, right? But Enochian literature kind of personifies it into this devil-like figure. And he's the head of the Sons of Darkness. He's the evil general against Michael,
Yep.
And Revelation kind of carries that on, making Jesus into the Michael figure, and that's where you really start getting the Christian theories where Jesus is the angel of the Lord and Jesus is Michael incarnate and all sorts of just loopy things, even though their own New Testament says that Jesus isn't an angel. But I digress. But what it's bringing to light, though, is that they believe this was knocking on the door just like the Essenes did. The Essenes had strict battle plans laid out, right?
Yeah, they were ready for a war.
They were ready. They had the battle plans laid out, and they even show that the mainstream view of Judaism, the temple and so on, was all corrupt. Jesus walks into the temple and starts flipping tables. That's very similar to how the Essenes looked at things, right?
Yeah, because they were very much hyper literal. They were very much extremists in that sense.
Right.
I think that there was some. I think it was brought up that the Essenes were so radical that it was to the point that they would not even leave their homes on Shabbat. They would not even move a muscle. They were so certain that it meant rest, as in not even doing anything.
Yeah, they wouldn't even eat.
That they would take it to the most extreme.
Yeah, they wouldn't even eat. So that's something very striking about the Essenes. They were very celibate, which we see in Judaism, or not Judaism. We see in Christianity. Pauline and Jesus is purported to not have married either. Essenes were celibate.
Say on that one.
Yeah, we could say a lot about Paul and Jesus in that regard. Also, they wouldn't eat on Shabbos. I mean, if any of you are acquainted with any Jewish family, Shabbos is something so beautiful. You make kiddush, you have a meal, right? It's something beautiful you do with your family, and the meal is very important. It sanctifies the physical body into the spiritual. That's the beauty of Judaism. Well, the Essenes weren't about that. The Essenes were very much about good versus evil, Platonic dualism, Enochian dualism, the body versus the spirit, good versus evil. All these things are diametrically opposed. So they actually made their latrine 2,000 cubits, I think it's 2,000 cubits, away from the encampment. And their Sabbath day journey was only 1,000 cubits. I think they had a different Sabbath day journey. So they wouldn't eat. That way they wouldn't have to go to the bathroom because they wouldn't be able to walk that far. So there were so many things that they hypercritically enhanced that made them seem like super pious, even though it went strictly against the Masorah. And it's also theorized that they were an esoteric branch off of the Sadducees. So it's basically you throw away the oral tradition as the Sadducees did and make your own. Right?
Yeah, that would make sense with why the Essenes got adopted into the elite lines. The Sadducees were already if they were running the temples and they were the ones that sold out to Rome, it would make sense that their more radical side, the Essene group, would of course be heavily accepted in Rome.
Right.
They're the radicals. They're in modernity, compare them to the evangelical radical Christians who go out to every protest carrying signs, and they're against abortion. They're against every crazy political left-wing thing.
Westboro Baptist, the Westboro Essene Church.
They canceling and all that crazy stuff. Yeah, that's where you get all that lot from.
I mean, we even have in the New Testament account in Luke that John the Baptist's father was a Levite. He was a priest. So we understand that the Essenes were very, a lot of them were of priestly origin. So it's starting to come together. It's starting to make sense.
Yeah.
John the Baptist would have been a priest. So I don't know, people. We can't really know anything for 100% certain, but where's the evidence leading us here? And what's crazy is a Christian commentator 200 years ago agrees with us. He was still a Christian, but he acknowledged the scholarship. And even before the Dead Sea Scrolls, he said that John the Baptist was an Essene. So it just goes to show that this isn't some new idea.
Yeah.
Right?
This has been around for a while. It's just Christianity has done as much as it can to bury this.
Yep.
And they use every polemic in the book. They use every apologetic tactic they can think of to push you away from even noticing these small details that really do give away. Think of it almost like a cover-up project. All the little holes that they forgot to fill in, they realize, oh shoot, those are still there. So they try to cover them up. But by that point, people like us and others who are fighting against a lot of this misinformation are putting it out there, and now they can't cover up the holes anymore. They're scrambling.
Right.
And the ones that realize that they have all those holes, the ones that bought in wholesale and then came to the realization, I've been lied to.
Yep.
The cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
That's where that comes in. That's where they're holding on to. Like we've discussed with like Testify, Eric from Testify on YouTube. You know, he's like with the virgin birth video we did.
Yeah.
That cognitive dissonance hit him real hard. He has already been very publicly notified that there's no real argument to be had there, and he still attempts it. It's all boiling down to that cognitive dissonance, and that's the realization of these little holes.
And that, I mean, I think you're giving, I'll be a bit less becoming. Cognitive dissonance is one thing. I'm very much convinced because you and I were both in these people's shoes, and we were able to beat it, right? You see the evidence and you reformulate your opinion based upon legitimate evidence and biblical truth. And so to me, I think when you start, because I've been getting a lot of call outs lately that I only do this for the money and I'm working for somebody. People, I don't make any money.
See, where's that money? Yeah,
I don't make any money off this.
Man, I've been helping you out, bro.
I work 2 jobs, y'all. So like, I mean, I'm thankful for all the donations people give. It helps. It really helps with the time I have to do to put in these presentations and so on and so forth. But I don't do it for the money. And if I did do it for the money, I would have quit it long ago. Right? And there's much more money to be made when the religion you subscribe to has a couple billion members, right? So
there was there
you know what I mean? So
there's always talk about that kind of stuff. There are people who are still Christian to this day, a couple that I do know that are Christian, they're leaders in the Christian movement, in the Christian religion. They are outright not Christians anymore, but they still do it.
Yeah, but because your pockets are swelling, how can you step away from that? You know,
exactly,
it's
and
your
it's also
livelihood.
exactly, and it's also that marginalization of a lot of them have their lives staked in this.
Yeah.
So now they don't get a choice.
Yeah, if you have a congregation of 2,000 people paying your bills, and you have a house you definitely could not afford because you have no marketable skill, besides for smelling snake oil, what are you going to keep doing? It's sad to say, but we've talked about this even, I think, in your first video on here about how you left. Yeah. Is that's what a lot of it comes down to, is half of these people know they're wrong.
Yeah.
And they continue in it because it's making them rich.
Yeah. It's feeding their delusion or it's feeding their pockets or both. And if it does both, that's even better for them. We see this in with all the popular apologists.
Right.
For making money and refuse to debate a number of even just YouTubers, that people just like you and me, who we don't have degrees, but we look at the knowledge, we've studied it all, and we've researched it, and yet these top-notch scholars, these apologists in the Christian church, are refusing to debate people like us. There's a lot of YouTubers out there, I could list a whole list of them, who have offered to debate Christian apologists, and these apologists refuse.
Yep.
Because they know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't want to acknowledge it because it'll affect their bottom dollar, and it'll affect how they have to view their life.
Yep. Yep. Ignorance is bliss, y'all. Comfortably numb.
Yep.
All right, final slide. Herod the Great and Antioch. So we understand. Actually, let me go back to that very first slide here. And we're going to talk about this part right here. This is pretty cool. If you could just read that little part right quick.
The fact that Herod the Great had adorned the city of Antioch with a long and stately colonnade may, perhaps, have given him a certain degree of influence there.
Him meaning Manaen, as a Herodian stepson, right?
Yep.
So let's go back down. So that photo on the right there is the colonnade road that Herod the Great built in Antioch. So we're seeing that Herod's fingers, his influence, were stretching not just from Judea and the surrounding areas, but even into Turkey and Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And where was Paul's home base? Where was the origin of the quote-unquote Christians? Antioch, right?
Yep, and Paul was in Tarsus. He was right there at the bottom of the country of Turkey. He wouldn't have been but a stone's throw from all of this.
Yeah, Tarsus was another
It
major
was
city
right next
in the
door.
Seleucid Empire also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He was,
Mhm.
and then if Paul is related to the Herodians, then he most certainly would have known about all of this.
Right. And I truly believe that's why Paul made his well, how about we read the before we go any further, how about you read the points
If I
there?
may. Herod the Great in Antioch, founded near the end of the 4th century BCE by Seleucus the First, Nicator,
And Nicator, yep.
one of Alexander the Great's generals. Antioch's geographic, military, and economic location, particularly the spice trade, the Silk Road, the Persian Royal Road, benefited its occupants, and eventually it rivaled Alexandria as the chief city of the Near East and as the main center of Hellenistic Judaism at the end of the Second Temple period. As a result of its longevity and the pivotal role it played in the emergence of both Hellenistic Judaism and early Christianity, Antioch was called the cradle of Christianity. The Roman client King Herod, most likely the great builder Herod the Great, erected a long
Stoa.
stoa on the east.
Yeah, Stoa are those columns there, the Stoa colonnade. That's what that is in Greek. Those are Stoa, the columns. But I did a video. This is actually the first video you commented on, I believe. Was really the history of Antioch. I mean, we understand that Antioch was the capital of the Seleucid Empire, people. The Hanukkah story, Hellenistic Judaism, right? Hellenistic culture attacking Judaism. And we understand that it caught on pretty good. And that it was a very small band of priests, devout priests who weren't going to stand for this, rebelled, and saved Judaism with the help of Hashem, of course. But we do understand that these ideas were catching on like wildfire. And we even know that the Hellenistic Jewish population in Antioch was second only to Alexandria in the region.
Mm-hmm. And what was going on in Alexandria, Steve? Just to give a little understanding here. What was big going on in Alexandria?
Oh, we had Gnosticism and Neoplatonism and all Hermeticism, everything, all these different ideologies, Greek originated ideologies, with dualism, Zoroastrianism, good versus evil, the body versus spirit. And that was a staple in Philo and
Alexandria.
Philo of Alexandria. That was his staple, was Gnosticism, right?
Yeah.
And the Platonic body versus spirit idea, and the intermediary. That's directly from Philo's Logos, is that the Logos is the highest, most intermediary between God and man.
Yeah.
Well, what is Christianity? What does Hebrews say Jesus is? The intermediary between God and man, right?
Yeah.
And there's a reason why Philo is credited as being really the father of Christian theology. It's for this very reason. So why are come on, y'all. Why are these ideas catching on in Antioch and not in Jerusalem? Come on, why did the religion migrate? And why did it explode in the largest city of Hellenistic Judaism in the region? What's the answer? Because that's the worldview they had already, right?
Yep.
Is there anything else you have? I mean, to me, it's just so clear, and we see that we see that the Herodians clearly already had a major influence. Like Manaen's stepdad built the biggest street in the city, so of course Manaen's going to have some major political pull in this city, right? So come on, people.
Yeah. It's all right there. It all originates in Egypt. It all
Yeah, I mean,
originates in
you did a full
Alexandria,
video on it. Everyone
Antioch.
check out his video, Egypt's Christ, on my channel. It breaks down Hermeticism and the Neoplatonic ideologies that pour into all this. So check that one out. That's a really good episode.
Yeah, it's all boiling. It all comes from right there. Because in Jerusalem, what was going on is in Jerusalem you have the Pharisees, you have those that are staying true to Torah, but the further out you go, when you get towards Antioch, towards Alexandria, you have much more Hellenized Jews, Jews that have more or less, they may have had Jewish ancestry, but the world they grew up in, the world they saw through their eyes, was very much Greek.
Yeah. Reading from
And
a
we see with
Septuagint on
Philo,
Shabbos,
for
right?
instance, we see with Philo the attempt to reconcile Jewish ideas with Greek ideas, and we see where even Philo stops. He says, "Look, it can only go so far."
Right. And here's the thing, like, Philo gets a bad rap. We understand that he was trying to reconcile some things, but even like now, to mainstream Torah Judaism, Philo is considered a major Grekified heretic. So imagine the people that didn't stop, that didn't try to reconcile and did take things too far,
Yeah,
right? If
and that's what you have
Philo
to
is,
wonder if Philo was willing to stop at this point and say, "We're not taking this any further because that violates Torah." So where did they get it from? They have to get it from somewhere.
right,
It
right,
wasn't
and
just, oh, some guy heard Philo thinking about this and then said, oh, well, it could logically go to this. Clearly, Jesus is the Son of God in the Logos. That's logical. No,
yeah,
that logic has to come from somewhere. You have to get the rationale from somewhere. You have to have the background from somewhere to think that way.
right,
And that background comes from the Gnostic groups that were running around that bred into early Hermetic philosophy, that bred into early Christianity.
yeah,
That's where it all originates from. All these ideas being mixed together, people, the Hellenistic Jews, hearing Philo's work and saying, this guy, he's Jewish and he's trying to reconcile what my ancestors believe with what I believe. And
yeah,
so, of course, they're going to try and take that forward, but where's their mindset already? It's already in Rome, it's already in Greece. So when they build off of it, while Philo may come up here and stop as in Jewish philosophy, these guys will keep going.
yeah.
And with Gnosticism, it can keep going perpetually,
Oh,
forever.
for sure. I mean, we also talked about Alexandria. So if you're in Alexandria, you're also having that Coptic Egyptian, that Grekified Egyptian religion coming into it also. And that's where you have the Ptolemaic statues of, Isis breastfeeding Horus that are exactly the same as Mary breastfeeding Jesus, and so on and so forth. So the literature, the worldview, the art, we give Christianity a bad rap about all the statues and paintings and so on, but um, is it necessarily idolatrous? Yes, of course, but we got to also remember that a lot of these people were illiterate and needed pictures to tell them the stories, you know. But regardless, um, and we could do a video on this if you like, but the symbology of Mary breastfeeding Jesus and Isis breastfeeding Horus and the Milky Way galaxy being a spilling of breast milk as the cosmic gods are feeding their children. Just so much all meshes together and creates this picture that we see that it just wasn't a worldview born from Torah. If anything, it was trying to take Torah and warp it to the pre-existent worldview of these different regions and map it onto other gods. But that's not Judaism, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know how much more we really have to beat this over the head, but
I don't think
it's
there's
pretty
much more
clear.
we can say.
Yeah, but it's
It's
pretty
so
clear that
straightforward.
this Ellicott fella, 200 years ago already, understood these concepts, and maybe because of position, maybe because of he's of course since deceased. I don't want to talk ill of the dead like that, but we don't know what his intentions were. If he knew these concepts but rejected it, it's What it does go to show is he didn't have modern scholarship, and he wrote a commentary that aligns with the same things we see.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I had to guess, I'd say he was probably citing everything from Josephus. So, and what's that telling you, people?
Even when Christian scholars are figuring this stuff out, there's something going on here. This is not just some coincidence.
Right. Where's the blind eye you have to turn? You know? This guy was pretty, he was dean at a university, I think.
Yeah.
Like, he clearly wasn't a stupid guy. You know?
Yeah.
And he was a bishop. He was an Anglican bishop.
Although I'm sure by now, most modern Christian scholars would probably call him a liberal scholar. You know.
From the 1800s. Their liberal was our conservative.
He just hated traditional understandings of Jesus. That's all there was to it.
Yeah. It's crazy. But I think this proves a major point. And if you watch this video in tandem with our Paul was Gnostic and the other Antioch video I have, and all of our Gnostic ideas, the Egypt's Christ, so on and so forth, you're going to see that the picture that's being painted, it's not Jewish, you know? It's anything but, honestly. It's anything but Torah, right? And Davon and I have a video coming out this week called Was Jesus Created? And that gets into some of the Gnostic concepts of, you know, the Logos origin and so on and so forth. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, Herod was a major builder in this city, the cradle of Christianity. You know, it's all intertwined, y'all. So yeah, there's really nothing else I have to say on the matter. I think we tackled it pretty well.
Yep.
Anything else you have? Any final statements?
No, just other than, just always be looking into the scholarship, always be reading up on stuff. Don't even just take our word for it. Everything we've said here, I'm sure Steve will put the slideshow and a lot of the resources in the description. But don't just take our word for it. Go and research it. Recently Steve and I have both gotten contrarian comments from both counter-missionaries, which are folks, I guess, who want to specialize in countering counter-missionaries. So they added on an extra counter?
Yeah, they're not a missionary, but they're not a counter-missionary.
Yeah, they said to be counter-missionaries. But we've gotten some comments from them, and so, even to those guys, we say this as well. Don't just take our word for it. Go look it up. Go look at the evidence. You don't want to believe us? You don't have to believe us. Go look at the evidence yourself. We looked at the evidence, and this is the point. This is the conclusions we drew. But go look at the evidence for yourself. If you think it makes a case for your argument, go for it.
Right.
But from what we see,
I don't
it
mean
doesn't.
to, I never want to slander anybody. So when people come on and make response videos to me and cuss me out, whatever. I'm not going to watch it. But what I do want to say is I was one of the payrolled Christian ministers, and I had enough intestinal fortitude to get out. I was on a Christian talk show. I hosted a Christian radio show. I did paid seminars on the book of Revelation. I was a payrolled youth pastor and evangelist. If I could make the conscious decision to put that behind me because I found the truth of Torah, anybody can. I don't care how much money is involved.
Yeah.
It takes a matter of wanting truth over everything else.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those people that just wants to keep reiterating my resume. But I studied apologetics at a college level. I was taking Christian apologetics courses at a college level. So I don't know. To me, it's so apparent. Call me blind. I don't care. Start studying history. If you don't have a firm grasp on history, to me, you're blind.
Yeah.
Because you don't have the postulative knowledge to even dissect the literature at its most basic form. I recently watched a PBS documentary, and it was one of the most objective, absolutely brilliant documentaries I've watched on the origins of Christianity. It's called it's a two-part. Actually, I think I'll link them in the description because it's that good. PBS is called From Jesus to Christ. And they're very objective. And they even mention that the names of the people in the churches in Asia Minor that are listed in Acts that Paul recounts, the people that it's talking about are never anyone like useless. Do you know what I mean? They're normally always very important people. The one name, actually, they found a inscription in Corinth of the same name, and this guy was like the main treasurer of the city of Corinth, and he was one of the main people listed in the book of Acts as being a companion of Paul in the Corinthian church. So we're seeing that there's some very influential elite people in these churches, right? And it has this Herodian connection, the Essenes, so on and so forth, higher up people in society. One even said that there was, so they had house churches, right? They didn't clearly have a built building they all congregated at, but they had house churches. And the one house church, it says the person's house was big enough that all the households, all the believers in the region could come congregate at that one house. So how big of a house do you have to have in the ancient world to house that many people?
That is a very huge home. You have to be very affluent to have such a large home.
So trust me, people, just don't take our word for it. Even when I'm not studying literary resources, I'm listening to videos from, well-renowned scholars on these same topics. So I'm never not immersing myself in learning about this topic, and Stephen here's the same way. As soon as the money hits his bank account, he's buying more books. You know what I mean? So
it's a problem. It's a real problem. I need help, guys.
He's a knowledge.
Buy me books instead of me buying them for myself. You guys should do that.
But yeah, and we'll finish up. We don't need to have a 2-hour show here, but I think this is very important, is when you really start getting the taste for knowledge. And knowledge is power, after all. I don't care what anyone says. What was that quote we just talked about the other day about? Oh. I wonder if you still have that picture. Do you still have that picture of that quote you sent me of the guy who said, just know something, not everything?
Let me see. Oh, here it is. Our favorite YouTube apologist. We actually were just watching a video of his today, Mr. Mike Winger. Shout out to our friend Mike Winger on YouTube. Yeah, I love you, bro.
Mike Winger.
You apologists, please take the burden off yourself to know everything, but keep the burden on yourself to know something. Have at least a reason to defend your faith.
Yeah. To me, that's a broken quote, because when I first came out of Christianity, I did nothing but learn. I didn't say a word about it for probably about 2 years, and all I did was just learn as much as I could, because I had to wash my mind out. And from then on out, my goal has been to know everything. There's a reason I do nothing but study and read and learn and listen. Do I enjoy it? Yeah, but at the same time, I enjoy it because it's giving me a more rounded knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, my goal was to know everything. And that sounds a little conceited. Okay. But that's my goal, is when it comes to this topic, I want to have just as much knowledge as the guy with 3 PhDs in the topic, That's like my goal. So while I understand where he's coming from, know something, don't just stop there, because as soon as you know something, anyone who knows something acts like they know everything. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, I read this very similar, very broken quote, but in a very different tone. I came from deliverance ministry, and so for those of you who are ex-Christians who know what deliverance ministry is, that's where my business started, Grand Prairie Paranormal. We started as deliverance ministry. and we moved slowly out of that once I left Christianity. The whole group started slowly moving out of it, everyone starting their own path and finding their own evidence that would eventually lead them out. A lot of which me and Steve have also compiled on his channel for you to see. Now, when I saw Mike's quote, I actually felt that was probably the worst advice he could give any apologist.
Mm-hmm.
Because what he's telling them is, there's nothing left. Whatever little shrivel of hope you have left, cling to it, because that's all that's left. Everything else is a lie. That's what it sounds like to me. It's like he knows he's broken. He knows he's lost. But they have to cling to it because it's what they have left.
Yeah.
So to me, this isn't so much of him trying to give hope. It's more of him telling the sad reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely hear that in the quote too. To me, it's just bad. It's bad advice all around.
Yeah.
To me, it's like condoning ignorance. Like once you it's almost like saying like once you have something, stick with that. You know, argue with that single point continually because that's what's going to keep you in the faith. Rather than just learn for the sake of learning and become a very well-rounded intellectual and get to the truth, get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
To me, it's pulling the wool over your eyes. It's turning that blind eye, like we said.
Yeah.
You know, these apologists, unfortunately, they have to turn a blind eye to the truth.
Yeah.
And that quote proves it. That's the advice he's giving to new and upcoming apologists is don't learn as much as you can. Just stick to what works. But at the same time, what works now? Because when it's getting to the point now that we have people like Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Federo and Rabbi Skoback, and shout out to Tanakh Talk who has all them on there all the time.
Let's go, Will. Woo.
And they have the scriptural references and the mistranslations and the misapplications. They have that locked down. And that really gives people like us the opportunity to get into worldview of Gnosticism and history. But when it's getting so far into this that the counter-missionary arguments are literally like so in depth that we can destroy your claims by proving that the worldview and the history doesn't support what you say. Like, what do you have left? You know, all you have is your experience. All you have is your emotion. All you have is the little tingle that went up your spine when you felt Jesus touch you for the first time. You know? And I know how bad that sounded. I'm sorry. But what do they have left? You know? It's like every facet of their argument has been debunked. You know, and now they start using rabbinic literature like the Talmud and the Zohar. You know, some things which you yourself have just debunked recently.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, go check out Grand Prairie Paranormal Research and Investigations official YouTube channel. We have a 1 minute long video because that's as long as it took me to find the missionary Christian claims about the Zohar and then debunk them. Yep, you can debunk these claims within under a minute.
Yeah. So everyone who sees this, man, I just hope what we say, you know, found itself deep in there. Anyone who wants the notes, let me know. I'll gladly put the link in there. And further, I mean, I put the notes up as a presentation so you can follow along if you want to screenshot them, whatever. This information isn't hard to find. I mean, this presentation was made in under an hour. You know? And I understand that Stephen and I have some pretty decent knowledge on the subject, but still, like, I compiled these notes in under an hour. So the information is out there, you know? Search it out for yourself. Don't listen to what we say. That's the best advice we could give. And this is turning a bit into more like a testimonial on our part, but I mean, it's very intertwined because we have 200 years ago a bishop conceding the same things we're saying, but his cognitive dissonance kept him in the faith.
Yeah.
Right?
And we see, like we've said 100 times already this video, we see it today. it hasn't stopped. And that's why we got to get this out there. That's why people got to listen to this information, research it themselves. Because that's the only way to defeat cognitive dissonance, is to look into it for yourself.
Yeah.
And
be honest. Be honest with yourself. That when you hear something
honestly,
that when you hear and that's, I know that's the background that you and I both have, is when you find something, when you hear something or read something that challenges your core belief, you can either study that out or you can ignore it.
Yeah.
And I think 99% of modern Christianity ignores it. Sadly. The Noachide movement is growing rapidly. It's getting huge.
Yeah.
But I mean, what's a few million compared to a billion, right? So the blind eye is being turned. People are ignoring, and that's just so sad. And I understand it's hard. People, but really, where's your heart at? Do you want to know Hashem? Do you want to know Hashem better than you ever have? Do you want to truly experience Hashem in your life and just see the beauty of the Torah and really the truth of the central cosmic force that created everything, right? Hashem is everywhere, so get rid of all the intermediaries and realize that there's nothing left but Hashem.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes down to. And when you crave that truth and you crave the relationship, I've been hearing that a lot lately, especially since I was a Pentecostal. I've heard that my whole life, that it's not about religion, it's about a relationship. Well, if you really want a relationship with your Creator, ditch the intermediary, ditch the Logos, ditch the New Testament, and just get closer to Hashem.
Yeah.
And that's my final remark. We don't need to continue on that. If you have anything else, feel free.
No, I got nothing else.
Okay, that's my final remark on the matter. But everybody, subscribe to his channel. That 1-minute video does pretty much debunk those misquoted Zohar ideas. But until next time, I'm your host, Steve Eisenhower, joined with my good friend, Steven Martinez. This was the Exodus Project, and we'll see you on the other side, everybody.